You found the podcast. You found the podcast, Go Beyond the Brief, where we take a deep dive into the societal currents shaping our lives. Together, we'll explore the often unseen forces at play. We'll examine the research, dissect the data, and most importantly, if you're seeking to understand what's shaping our society, this is the place.
Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a global health crisis. Life-saving vaccines are urgently needed, governments everywhere scrambling. You'd probably expect pretty straightforward agreements, right? Mutually beneficial. Well, today we're taking a deep dive into the surprising, often hidden legal frameworks that governed how mRNA vaccines were procured. We're focusing on something called arbitration clauses and, how they really impacted global public health.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how these clauses, and actually some other legal bits too, they didn't just manage disputes. They fundamentally reshaped the whole power balance.
Yeah.
Between these big pharma companies and actual sovereign governments. It created a model that was, well, quite different from the usual public health partnerships we'd seen before.
Right. So our mission here is to uncover how these sort of technical-sounding legal details actually played a massive role. Thinking about corporate accountability, vaccine equity, we're digging into press releases, leaked contracts, legal reports, the real fine print stuff. Okay, so we found clear evidence that arbitration clauses, they were critical, definitely a key component, but they weren't uniform across all the deals, were they? And this is where it starts to get really interesting. What did we see with companies like, say, Pfizer-BioNTech?
Well, Pfizer-BioNTech, they strategically used secret binding arbitration clauses in their deals, their bilateral contracts with countries like Brazil, the UK, examples like that. These clauses basically said any disputes wouldn't go through the country's own courts. No. Instead, disputes go to a secret international chamber of commerce, an ICC arbitration tribunal applying New York law.
Hang on, secret in New York law? That sounds like completely bypassing a country's own justice system. Why New York law? What was the leverage there?
Exactly. New York law is often preferred in big international business deals. It's predictable, robust. Companies like that predictability when operating globally. As for leverage, well, think about it. Global health crisis. Nations were desperate for vaccines.
Yeah.
Pfizer used that urgency, basically. They created this kind of private, confidential court system for themselves. It shielded them from public scrutiny, from legal challenges in national courts.
Okay, so beyond this private court system, were there other things in the contracts, other tools that sort of tilted the scales?
Oh, yes. It wasn't just arbitration. These contracts had really broad indemnity provisions. That's basically where one side agrees to cover the other's legal costs or damages, hold them harmless. And they also had really strict confidentiality requirements. So what this meant for governments was they ended up taking on a huge chunk of the financial and legal risk that you normally expect a manufacturer to bear.
Right. Can you give us an example? How extreme did these indemnity clauses get?
Sure. The leaked Pfizer contract with the Dominican Republic is a pretty stark one. It actually required the government there to, and I'm quoting loosely here, indemnify, defend, and hold harmless Pfizer, even if the claims came from the company's own acts of negligence, fraud, or malice.
Wait, even for their own negligence or fraud?
Yes. Legal experts widely criticize that as utterly unreasonable. Basically, the government had to promise to pay up even if Pfizer messed up badly. Or worse.
Wow. And then there were reports, weren't there, that Pfizer pushed even further sometimes, asking countries like Brazil, Argentina to offer up sovereign assets, things like embassy buildings, military bases, as collateral, against legal costs. That was described as high-level bullying.
It really does sound like that, doesn't it? Demanding sovereign assets as collateral, that's huge. It means a country's own infrastructure, its diplomatic presence, could theoretically be on the line in a dispute. And add to that these walls of secrecy from the confidentiality clauses, like in the Brazil deal, they couldn't announce the terms publicly. This creates what's called information asymmetry. Governments were kept in the dark about what deals other countries were getting, which gave the companies huge leverage, obviously. Governments couldn't compare notes, couldn't negotiate together effectively.
It paints a picture of really stark contrasts. So what about Moderna, the other big mRNA player? How did they handle these legal things? Was it the same playbook?
Moderna actually took a somewhat different path. They did use arbitration, but mostly in their agreements with private manufacturing partners, like Lonza. That's more like standard business-to-business practice. Their contracts with governments, especially the U.S. government, stuck closer to standard U.S. federal procurement rules for disputes. See, the U.S. government wasn't just a customer. It was a co-investor, a scientific collaborator. They even had march-in rights, meaning the government could potentially step in and take over IP or production under certain conditions. A very different dynamic.
Okay, so the U.S. had this different setup, partly because of its role, but also pre-existing laws, right? What did this difference mean for other countries, especially developing nations needing vaccines?
That's a crucial point. The U.S. already had a legal framework in place, specifically the PRP Act, Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act. This law gave broad immunity to vaccine makers operating in the U.S. during a public health emergency, and it set up a federal compensation program for injuries. So it was like a built-in safety net for the companies in the U.S. market. But many developing nations, they didn't have anything like that, no similar statutory protection, which meant they were under immense pressure to accept these really tough terms from Pfizer, terms that effectively ceded sovereignty, ceded legal recourse to a foreign system. It basically created this two-tiered system of legal risk. Wealthier nations with strong frameworks were better protected, while others faced much harsher terms.
What a deep dive, truly, into this hidden legal architecture. It's really clear these contracts were a significant shift from, traditional public health partnerships, shifting enormous risk, enormous power, especially away from the most vulnerable governments.
Indeed. It leaves us with a really important question, something for you, the listener, to ponder. What lessons should we take away from this kind of new model of public health contracting? How do we ensure things are more equitable next time, more transparent? A better balance on legal liability in future global health crises? How do we protect sovereignty and public health when the pressure is